Time
So we'll
7:03.
call to order will be at 7:02 p.m.
7:02 p.m.
So welcome everyone.
Oh, Dan,
Yep.
I'm looking at section 22 of chapter 30A, and it says, you're right, the members present or absent. I guess I've read that to mean, since everybody is either present or absent, that you should identify both. But
Certainly no harm in listing everyone.
no harm.
It's always a good day when we have to have you look up the actual laws and come up with things. I guess that's part of the whole thing of why you're a lawyer. You get to have that fun and then interpret it and give us your opinions. So the purpose behind this particular meeting, we haven't met since early last year in 2024. For cable advisory, a couple of things have occurred. One is that the town council did receive a request for a license that that was sent over to esteemed my Lord Mullen, aka Barrister Mullen, who I let us know that that request from Comcast had come in for a license, and upon that, I requested to know if he wanted our potential guidance and assistance in that, as we have a statutory ability to do that. It's not a requirement, it's a optional capabilities if authorized by the town council. So that's the predominant issue. There have not been any public inquiries that I'm aware of throughout the year that have occurred that have involved television where people have requested our assistance. Every once in a while that does come in, but I haven't honestly seen it recently. So that's the welcome introductions. If everyone just wants to quickly go around and just state your role with regards to either cable TV advisory, or WCAT, or the town in Tom's case. That way we can go through and make sure everyone knows who's who.
Sure, happy to start. Shane McCarthy. Tom, I met you at the last meeting in person, so good to see you again. I am on the Cable Advisory Board.
Good to see you, Shane.
I guess I'll go next. Ian McDermott, Executive Director of Wakefield Community Access Television.
Good to see you, Ian.
Excellent.
Brian McCovery, volunteer at WCAT and a member along with Shane of the WCAT working group created by the town council.
Hey, Brian. And I'm Tom Mullen, the town council.
That would be SEL.
SEL.
Just because there is often confusion. Okay. Anyone, if you want to speak in from a public participation perspective, you can. Otherwise, the meetings tend to be pretty informal and you can talk at pretty much any time. So item number 4 is the annual report submission. Shane, I believe that was something that you were going to take on.
And
do you have that?
I forget the date that I sent it. I can look it up, but I believe I did send that. I can look at the send date if you like to do that.
It looks like it's January 28th. Taking a look at it now, I'm just going to open it. Just to make sure that we didn't get into any open meeting law problems, I specifically didn't look at it outside of a meeting. So I'm now sharing that particular report. At this point, we actually only had one committee meeting. I don't recall the date offhand. If you want to look that up, otherwise it can be found on the town website.
Okay. was my first one, so I'm open to any suggestions as well. So if we need to change or modify, let's see.
Uh, anyone else have input, thoughts on this? Otherwise, it looks like it has all of the core requirements. It's not much from the committee to report, but we are required by bylaw to submit a report.
The one thing I don't have other dates. How would I be, so I'm on the website now. How can is there a way to go like day by day? Is there a way to find it? I thought we met twice. Like, can I search by cable advisory board? I don't think I can.
I'm not sure offhand.
Yeah, I don't believe so. I may have another way. Let me just see if I go. Hang on.
I thought if you went to the Cable Advisory Committee page, that it would show you meetings and minutes as well on the town website.
You know what? Let me hang on. Let me share and let's see if we can find this as a group together. Can you all see my? Hang on. Share. Okay, so I'm here. Any thoughts as far as how to find?
So under boards and committees,
Let's see. Okay.
you'll see Cable Advisory Committee,
Okay.
and it's on the right-hand side. You'll see the agenda.
Okay. So let's see. So we met on. This is beautiful. Looks like April 25th is when we met. Perfect. All right. Can I just put that date in there, Dan? April 25th, and I guess you are correct. It was just once.
Yep. We discussed meeting toward the end of the year, but with different things going on, that ended up not happening.
Correct.
So, okay, with that, the submission with that edit, the submission looks good to me for annual report submission. In which case, we should probably take a vote just to authorize the submission. If you want to send it off to Sherry, that part will be done. So move to submit the annual report with the addition of the date. You
Second.
Second the motion, discussion, voting in favor. So Shane, by roll call,
Aye.
and myself approval is as well. So we have to take roll call votes. That's one of the requirements of remote participation. So we're trying to follow the rules as best we can, especially where we have the esteemed my Lord Mullen present. He would have to defend us anyways, but this way he can attest himself that yes, we are trying to do what we can. Okay.
Let me just be clear too. Do you want to? Are you going to send that in, or do
If you want to send it and just copy the cable advisory
email
email,
and send it to Sherry?
Sherry Dalton.
Done. Okay.
So that brings us to the primary element, which is the request for cable TV licenses and the process for negotiations. So this is by statute, this committee has the ability to be the negotiating arm for license agreements between the town and the landline-based cable television licensees. There are 3 in the town. The final authorizing board is the town council, CIL, not Tom, but they're the actual licensor for the town itself, but they have the ability to have that delegated. They've requested do the initial negotiations, and he's graciously asked for our assistance with that. So that's the background behind it. I believe we've only received 1 request for a license So in the current realm, because there's 3 licenses, and typically they have to mirror each other in value. Otherwise, you run into different types of purchasing issues. The current one I believe that's come up is Comcast. I don't think we've received requests for Verizon or RCN.
I don't think so, no. And
So
you run into a problem that in this area is called the level playing field. You know, basically every competitor insists on getting the same deal or better than every other competitor.
and if one gets better than the other, then they're not all the same, and then you get it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
So that brings us to cable TV licenses. The part that seems to be difficult, and with the group that we have assembled, is that there's a consistently declining pool that the revenues are coming from for the franchise fees. So typically, the way that these licenses have been done in the past is that they have really 2 basic components. They've got franchise fees and capital expenses. All those get broken out into 3 different areas, sometimes referred to as PEG, public, educational, and governmental uses. One third for each. So education is allocated typically to the schools for their television program, and education for around the television related programming. But the number of licensed users of cable television has been declining over the last 10 years, and over the last about 7 years in particular, it's really nosedived. Last I checked, I think RCN in particular had less than 100 subscribers to cable television. I'm not sure how many are left by Comcast and Verizon. Ian, do you know the numbers of actual cable television?
Yeah, I have them up through, give me 1 second to get too many pieces of paper on my desk here. I have them up through 2023.
And 2023 is the last available year for us.
Yeah, here we go. That's franchise fees. That's too small for me to read. As of right now, in 2023, RCN has 336.
Oh, okay.
That was cable television?
Verizon
Okay.
has 2,859 and Comcast has 3,245 for a total of 6,440 individual bills within the confines of Wakefield.
And sorry, just for the notes again, how many with Comcast again?
Comcast was 3,245. These are all numbers that are
Okay.
pulled from the Massachusetts government website that the cable companies are required to give this information to.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that's cable television as opposed to total customers.
Yeah, as far as I know, that's cable television subscribers.
Okay, and presumably those numbers have probably continued to decline.
Yeah, so
Year-
we have
year
them
over year.
going, we have them going back to 2002. And we can tell you that from 2015 to 2023, 2015, it was 9,922. And as of 2023, it's 6,440. So you've essentially lost about a third so far.
And so part of this is figuring out what the rate should be that we should target for negotiations for what's called the franchise fee. That does get passed on to the customers in this case. It doesn't have to be, but the utilities are permitted to do so, and to the best of my knowledge, all 3 of them do pass this fee on to the customers. It's not a tax, it's a fee, but it's also what ultimately funds WCA, is one of the pieces that helps fund WCAT. And I believe the current rate is 4.5%. Is that correct?
Yes, that is what we have on the current contracts with Comcast and Comcast and Verizon. RCN is different because there was in the last contract negotiation. Tom, I don't know if you were involved in that one, but there was some back and forth where there were high definition channels given to us, and because of that, RCN cut the percentage down on it in lieu of the cost of those high definition channels. So if you look at that contract, it represents a different percentage, but that's because of the in-kind expense of the high definition channels from RCN. So essentially the rate is the same, it just doesn't look it.
Okay. So, and that's important just from the level playing field
Correct.
componentry. So RCN is a bit different than the other vendors because they also provide the iNet, which is the internet backbone for
Correct.
the town buildings.
Yes, that is correct.
So just important information is we're figuring things out because we don't want to have too much of a disincentive for these providers. We also want to make it so that WCAT has a viable revenue source. And the numbers have historically been between 3% and 5% for these franchise fees in the Commonwealth that I'm aware of.
Yes, 5 is your maximum, and that is by, I believe, federal statute.
Dan, could I ask, the RCN differential, owing as it does to they're giving us high definition channels and they're installing the iNet, were those one-time expenditures that shouldn't be reflected in a discount going forward, or are those ongoing expenses that should result in a continued discount?
I do not know about the iNet. That would be a question directed to maybe Todd Bowden in the town. As far as I understand with the HD channels for us, that is a continual in the 10-year contract. That percentage pays for those channel uses on a year-by-year basis, which actually, and then by the time this contract comes up, one of the ways we're looking to try and recoup some money is actually give those channels back and get our money coming in instead.
So to see if that can be renegotiated, but that would be with RCN.
That would be with RCN, yes. Yeah, currently all of the contracts are at 4.5% out of 5. Now, whether you can get another 0.5% out of any of them, don't know, but we did do some quick math and it turns out to be about $60,000, at least for WCAT, and I believe there's a associated amount going to the school.
2/3 would go to WCAT, 1/3 would go to the school.
Yes.
Of the difference. So it'd be approximate if 2/3, if that affects WCAT by 60,000, it would be presumably about 30,000 for the schools.
I think roughly, yes, but we haven't done those numbers to any great depth.
And is that an annual differential? Or is
That's what we believe, yes. No, that would
Okay.
be, that's an annual, that's the percentage every year.
So if you went up from 4.5% to 5% for all 3 carriers, you're saying that would be the difference in amount?
That's the rough estimate that we've kind of gotten. We haven't gone deep into those numbers yet, but that would be the rough number I believe I have. I can get you the specific numbers that my treasurer has been putting together.
And so that would mean 60,000 just for WCAT?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay.
And that's based upon static, is that with the assumption of static subscriber base?
Yes, that is based
Okay.
on us from last year.
Okay. And so as I think about the different elements here and the different components, on the one hand, getting the funding from the cable television subscribers makes sense where they cable television subscribers automatically have the direct benefit of directly tuning in, so to speak, to all of the WCAT channels. That notwithstanding, those who are no longer paying those franchise fees also have the benefit of the WCAT programming through streaming and online. So
Correct.
it's a matter of where is that burden and how does that burden to provide what is truly great programming and great services, how does that get divided? Who becomes responsible for it?
So one of the things that is going on is within the state government, there has been a continual bill for a streaming fee, much like a cable fee, that is put on by any company that is streaming into Massachusetts. And that being each town would then receive their portion based on the number of subscribers that Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, and all the others would have within that township. That bill has now, Brian, refresh me, 5 times?
This will be the fourth 2-year session that those bills have been filed.
And they have been either left in committee or pushed off past the time that the session was open. And they're going in again for this session. And that bill is, I don't know about the current version of the language, but it essentially is supposed to match the 5%.
I'm not sure about that anymore.
Okay.
So just as a quick background on last session's bill, it started out with a 5% of gross revenues, similar to what cable does. That 5% was going to be allocated 20% to the state general fund, 40% to the municipality, 40% to the stations based on population. Had a hearing with the joint committee very early on last session, so sometime in 23, basically. And the question came up at that meeting with the joint committee, well, why does any money have to go to the general fund? Because technically, the people at the state are already doing these calculations based on cable peg fees. So the infrastructure, if you will, is in place. But it was what it was at that time. So as the session wore on, those two bills, the House bill and the Senate bill, which were identical, had a net of 94 co-sponsors because some people sign on to both bills. 94 co-sponsors at that time was roughly 1/2 of all the legislatures. So that seemed pretty positive. In the 23rd hour, the joint committee decided to rewrite the bill in order to accommodate those who were against the original bill, specifically the streamers. And so without consultation, they rewrote that bill, and now there's going to be an advisory committee formed. There is no more money going to the municipalities, and the money would be going based on an agreed upon formula with the advisory board, which is made up of the streamers, somebody from Mass Access, the trade group, Department of Revenue, et cetera, et cetera. There are 5 people on that. That got it out of the joint committee, but it failed in both the House and the Senate and died. So this session, they have refiled exactly the same language as the rewritten bill. And I think it's safe to say that no one is really in favor of that, for the reason that the formula could give the streamers a smaller percentage to pay than the cable providers. And that just seems like a recipe for disaster. But that's where it is now. Those bills have not been assigned final numbers yet. They're still House docket, Senate docket. Actually, the joint committees no committees have been formed yet. You know, we're, 2 months now into the session. No committees have been formed yet. Once those committees get formed, the bills will get assigned, an S dot number and a House dot number. And then they'll get assigned to a committee. There'll be more public hearings. But the theory is, for the sponsors of the bills, so far this year, there's a handful, that because we're starting where we left off, there shouldn't be as much ground to cover. So that's basically where we are. And it's very difficult to tell what the formula would do for anybody's. Our concern is WCAT, obviously, but it's supposed to guarantee you a return to your 3 highest years of revenue. So for us, I think, Ian, if you had it, it was 14, 15, and 16. I think it doesn't really make any difference. But my point is, it's only based on revenues. So the fact that your expenses are going up for a lot of reasons, obviously staff, benefits for those that take it, capital contributions are pretty much being phased out by the 3 companies we deal with anyway. So we're not expecting too much for capital, which means all those expenditures would have to come out of operating funds. So still a long way to go. I just was on a meeting last night with Senator Lewis. He ran it, had nothing to do with me. We had a constituent meeting. And he got talking about the rules made in the Senate. And one of the rules was to get all of these bills out of committee by the end of this year rather than towards the end of 2026, which would be a help because you get a sense of where things are going. But long way to go, and very difficult to pinpoint what exactly the financial benefit will be. So, long story for a short question.
And yeah, it is 2016, 2017, 2018
Okay.
were our 3 highest.
And I think you
That's helpful.
Did I put it on the bottom of that for me? And I think using that, and based on what we thought the original formula was, that would be 60,000. Is that on that? I can't remember whether I put it on the report or not. It doesn't really make a difference. I mean, anything's going to be a benefit, but it's still a slog. And one other thing I just like to point out, when you look at the drop in cable subscribers, and it's hard to tell because of the way, it's hard to tell about housing, but you got to figure that there's more actual people in Wakefield. And so the fact that those cable subscriptions are still going down, despite an increase in units, housing units, that's not positive either, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and here you have here on your thing, 79,086 was the average of those 3 years.
Okay. So that, I mean, obviously $80,000 helps WCAT. I just don't think it's a long-term fix going that direction. And just one other comment, and then I'll shut up. One of the things about the way the bill was originally drafted, with money going to the general fund, money going to the municipality, money going to the cable stations, it was easy to generate support for that. When we reached out to Mass Municipal Association, when we reached out to the town council, we were selling it the way it was written, and that everybody's going to benefit from this. And obviously, the town could certainly use funds, always can, just like WCAT can. The general fund for the state can always use funds. When all of that went away, it's like, well, wait a minute. We just asked these people to support the bill as it was written. They rewrite it in committee, and you have no chance to say, geez, that's great, that's not great. How about we make this change? It was just done. So it's tough to know what you're lobbying for if the rules change in the 23rd hour.
No, thank you for sharing.
I'm going to mute myself now.
That you can always come off mute, Brian. You've got a lot of knowledge and passion for this, so it's much appreciated. That's helpful. Do we have anything about the demographics? Do we know anything about the demographics of the current subscribers? And part of the reason why I'm asking that is based upon largely the demographics of the people I know who are still subscribing. There's a disproportionate number that are have more seniority in years than others. And a lot of that has to do with just the technologies and components that they're used to. Cable television, and I've heard this from all three of the vendors as well as others, is no longer a profitable business. They do it because it gives them access to internet and other tools and VoIP and so forth where they can make money. RCN, the last time I had a conversation, they told me that they made approximately $5 per account per month for cable television. That's what it maxed out at in terms of their profit margin. They also make fees and things along those lines. But if you take $5 at 336 households, that's not very much money a month to justify a lot of overhead. So on the cable television itself, I don't see us at high risk for them saying, oh, we're going to rip our lines down, because part of this gives them access to the polls, and that allows them to sell internet. It allows them to sell other things. So there are reasons, but where I'm going with this is, as we look at the franchise fees, if we look and say, well, if we increase that to say 5%, who's going to be most impacted by that? And I suspect it will be those who are effectively, again, more senior in years than others in the town. And while they may be people who actually consume more of the services from WCAT, I don't know. WCAT has universal benefit to everyone, excuse me, to everyone in town. And so I don't want to see there be effectively a penalty because someone is choosing to continue using cable from a franchise fee perspective, knowing that it's going to just get passed on. So that's I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying that we necessarily need to lower it anymore, but my initial reaction is I'm reluctant to raise it because of where it is being applied. So that's my 2 cents, but open to thoughts and discussion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I agree as well. I don't think we necessarily. I would say we definitely don't want to increase it, but we also don't want to decrease it because of the situation. So I'm just kind of under the impression, I guess, steady as she goes, right? I think kind of leave it where it is how I feel about it as well.
And I believe we've been at 4.5%, I think, since the 1990s. Is my recollection. I came on to this committee in 2004, and it's been 4.5% for the contracts that I recall in between 2004, 2010, and then the more recent iterations as well. The pieces that have changed, and Ian was kind of alluding to this, is the other components. So the in-kind, which is done by RCN, and then the capital expenses. And I know that was decreased significantly in the last contract. There is certainly going to be a request by the licensees to eliminate the capital expenses. I think that becomes a mistake. The capital expenses does not get charged back directly to the consumer. It gets indirectly charged back in terms of rates, surcharges, and other components, but that's a profit line item that comes back. And so that's where I'm looking at this saying, okay, how should we request on a contract and the contract duration? They've historically been 10 years to sometimes they've been 15 years. So we have, those are the other primary negotiating points. And Tom, if there's other things that you think will be raised, we'll definitely want to have those discussions. But those are the different pieces as you start having discussions with some of the counterparts. So thoughts as it relates to the capital expenses?
Well, and Dan, let me make one correction of you there. Verizon now only offers 5-year contracts with a 2-year out, or is it a 3-year out? 3-year out.
Yeah.
So it's not even a 10-year contract anymore.
Okay. Their first one was 15 when they came in.
Comcast was, yes, Comcast and RCN were, then they went to 10, I believe.
Right.
Verizon, I think, was only ever 10, the first one. Tom, please correct me. And then they
But-
went to 5 in the last one we did, which was 4 years ago.
So in which case they should be requesting a renewal shortly.
It's actually the exact same year as Comcast.
Okay. But Tom, you have not received the request that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm not aware of one.
Okay. So with that, do we want to try and offer a 5-year contract to then Comcast again on the level playing field basis? The advantage to that is that if there is legislation, federal or otherwise, it'll be less that has to be handled from potential changes and a phase in, phase out type of timing. The downside is less length of stability.
Yeah, Dan, I figured that my marching orders would be to try to get as long a term on each of these contracts as possible, recognizing that I have next to no bargaining power. So-
Yeah.
The next to no bargaining power I would disagree with, because the license allows them to run their lines on the poles.
That's a good point. Yeah, that is good.
And that is a really strong negotiating point. Unlike other communities where those poles may be owned by a large telecommunications provider, in Wakefield, those are owned by WMGLD or the town itself. And as their WMGLD, they are actually part of the governmental assets. So that's where for them to be able to deliver their other services, it's significant. And I think that's where I'm not against having as long a contract as possible. The question becomes, do we try to get a 10-year contract if possible? And if there's an absolute no, obviously that's a hard thing to go by. You've done negotiations for many years, so I've got confidence in that.
So I'm convinced that, as Ian says, with Verizon, it's an absolute no. Linfield just completed their latest negotiation, and 5 years with a 3-year option to get out was the best that we could possibly do.
And that seems realistic for Verizon. I think that if Comcast is willing to do 10 years, I think we do it. Otherwise, I think we would want to go back to similar language as Verizon in that way. That's my initial 2 cents. Shane, your thoughts as well?
Yeah, no, makes sense. It's funny, I'm torn as well. I'm wondering, to Tom's point, if we should try and lock him up. Who knows, meaning for as long as we can. Because who knows where we're gonna be 5 years from now. So I agree. I'd say let's try and get them in as long an agreement as we can. If not, let's try and mirror the two.
And for the capital, the capital component, that's something I'm not sure if Linfield was able to secure that or not. Some communities can, some communities have not. The numbers have continually gone down over the last 20 years, but I don't think we want to go to zero, which is I'm sure where the utilities want to go. The way that it's been staggered over the years is usually an amount upfront and then an amount in the middle of the contract and then an amount towards the end of the contract. So it kind of gets distributed 3 times throughout the contract. If it's a 5-year contract, I would think that we would probably do some in years 1, 3, and 5, but that would be required even if they opt out of the contract. So they can't opt out of the amount for the actual improvements, the capital componentry, just because those purchases need to be made usually in advance.
So just an observation, Dan, if I might. One of the things about Massachusetts is that if I'm a cable company, for example, Vermont has 26 PEG stations. And I mean, that's Vermont, so obviously it's not population comparable. But my point is, in Massachusetts, there are roughly 260 cable stations. So if I'm Comcast or Verizon or RCN, I'm going to be very careful about how long I go on a contract for Wakefield. If Winchester's going to say, well, you just did a 10-year contract for Wakefield, we want a 10-year contract. So that's one observation. The other observation is that we're obviously focused on what's going on in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but there was last year in Washington, again, before the current election, a bill that was proposed that didn't end up going anywhere would have given complete control to the cable operators and no control at all to the municipal entities. That died in the session. Now, new administration in Washington, you're seeing things with NPR and some of the other stations and just media in general. I would be shocked if those things didn't come back and say, you know what? Nope, we're not gonna do anything for any media people. Peg channels are, ABC, NBC, Fox, MSNBC. I think we got to be aware of what's going on nationally as well too. So
agreed. But that said, how do we? WCAT is somewhat different than other cable stations in the Commonwealth and in the area in 2 ways. One, it operates in a way that is award-winning and more professional than almost any other station around. I look at like Reading, RCTV, which is a shell compared to WCAT. Winchester, WinCam is reasonably well run as well, but that's also smaller. It doesn't have the space, doesn't have the technology. And for us to continue with what we're doing, these meetings get rebroadcast and handled partially with the assistance of CAT. They certainly do a lot of meetings in the studio. I think that it's important to try and secure some of the funding for those capital improvements. And without getting specific into CAT's issues, because that's not the purpose of this particular committee. I think that it's something that we want to try and get money in. And my initial thinking is that this is coming out of the general profits of the organization that has nothing to do with cable revenues. Because again, it's the license to run on the poles. And it's a license for them to come in and manage all that. My initial thinking is something along the lines of $25,000 in installment for 3 installments over 5 years, for each of 3 installments over 5 years. So it basically becomes a $75,000 payment that gets staggered. There's no interest or anything on that, but that way upon in year 1, year 3, year 5. If it's 10-year contract, I think that effectively it ideally it gets repeated, but I could also see in lieu of that the second 5 years just has perhaps one more installment somewhere around year 8. So that way it kind of gives an incentive to have a longer contract at a higher guaranteed peg rate in lieu of and they get the security of knowing that, okay, they don't have to have a realistic risk of having these other fees. So that's my initial 2 cents,
Yeah,
which is a little bit lower than the $100,000 that I know had been negotiated in the past.
and Dan, I would just add there that if you have a contract like the ones that Verizon is doing, where there is an early opt-out opportunity for the company, you want to try to negotiate front loading of those installments so that they you get the benefit even if the company opts out early. And Verizon was very good about offering that in Linfield.
And I'm in agreement. I think that if they do an opt-out, then the amounts for those for possible future installments become due immediately. So if they want to get out, they can, but basically the amounts for those capital expenses become immediately due. And I'm thinking similarly with anyone who tries to break the contract. So that's just my initial thinking of what seems to be a reasonable approach. So for 10-year contract, we're back to $100,000. For a 5-year contract, it's $75,000. So there become advantages to the companies, and they can choose what is more important to them, without putting the town in a bad place in either position. And I think, again, our negotiating point is the fact that these are our polls. So that's my thoughts from a negotiation perspective. Shane, your thoughts on that?
No, I completely concur. No, it makes perfect sense. And I think that's a good incentive for them to do the 10-year agreement.
And I think that it also allows us to not raise the franchise fees on the subscribers either, because I think that that's really important, and that's something that gets communicated upon this, is that we're not looking to raise that rate because of the disproportionate nature of it.
Agree.
Yeah, and Dan,
So-
I'd also like to say that I don't look forward towards raising that rate, but I have to bring it up as the the defender of WCAT. I have to bring that up as an option of one way of making us to stay solvent, but I would not want to do that.
Agreed. I leave the full solvency to the CAT working group, because which I'm fully supportive of, and I've given some counsel over the years of different ways of with the success of now having it built into the town budget, at least as a initially as a zero cost line item, so that should there be tax levy money that gets mixed in, it won't come out as being such a new concept for the people at town meeting. So, and those types of things are important, but for the contract itself, I think that the items we've discussed here seem like a reasonable way forward. And again, the idea being a win-win-win, that the vendors win, the residents win, and the companies win. And the municipality gets the benefit of CAT, which gets valuable income. Does that seem like it would meet the needs in a reasonable way for CAT to continue delivering the services that it offers.
I think that's definitely one of the ways, along with several others that we're looking to do, that will help us to be able to piece together a really nice foundation going forward.
Okay, Tom, anything else that you'd like to raise for guidance or otherwise?
No, thank you. This has been very helpful, and I appreciate the invitation, and it's good to see you all.
Likewise. So we've one other item. Shane, and since you're doing the minutes of the meeting, because this group meets so infrequently, my proposal is that if the minutes contain the aforementioned items, that that you send them and I will submit them as is to the town clerk. That way we don't have to, they become effectively self-approved. Unless if there is an issue, then we'll call another meeting to go over that. Because last thing that any of us want is to have a meeting with Tom where he then has to go back to the Attorney General's office and go through. I know he's got lots of recent experience going through that, and I'd much rather have his time used on the negotiations than handling that.
Dan, I recall that you were actually the occasion of a number of those efforts on my part
In years past, yes.
in years past. You've been duly domesticated since. I appreciate it.
As long as people genuinely attempt to do the right thing,
Mhm.
it's not really a problem. But in true form, you are always an amazing advocate for the client, whoever it happens to be.
Oh, thank you.
So anything else?
Mhm.
Anything else, Shane? Anything, Brian, Ian, that you'd like to bring up?
Nope, just thank you for all your work.
Sounds good. In which case, we will have another meeting either towards the end of the year or if there's a reason. Otherwise, it'll probably be next year. Tom, if you do hear back and there's something to report that you'd like input from the committee or that you just want to provide an update, please let me know and we can call a quick meeting to hold that. I don't think that there's an executive session purpose that would cause any of this to go into executive session because it's not really real property oriented. But if there's anything that we can provide guidance on, by all means, that's part of what we're here for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you much. And with that, I move to adjourn at 7:55. Second, all in favor, Shane?
Aye.
And I vote. So meeting is adjourned at 7:55 p.m. And that gets recorded as the other vote of the meeting. And with that, thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.